fainting, vomiting, screaming, horror. This is Terrifier 2. In a kindergarten in Florida, preparations were underway for a carnival party. However, just as everyone was immersed in the cheerful atmosphere, Sienna noticed something strange. Even though the bowl of food was crawling with worms, the little boy ignored it and kept eating happily. Even more disturbing was that ArtTheClown, who had escaped last year, had somehow shown up to perform, but the crowd continued cheering, completely unaware that danger was drawing near. This abnormal scene filled Sienna with dread. What shocked her even more was that Art forced a tightly wrapped gift into her hands. With no choice, Sienna accepted it and nervously opened the box. To her horror, inside was a beating heart. Just as she was overwhelmed with despair, Art suddenly pulled out a submachine gun and opened fire on the crowd. Before anyone could react, lives were taken in an instant. Even the ever-alert Sienna was struck by a stray bullet and thrown from her bed. The party instantly turned into a terrifying nightmare. Fortunately, Art's weapon soon ran out of bullets, but he wasn't finished. He picked up a flamethrower and pressed the valve. In an instant, the few survivors were engulfed in flames. Luckily, Sienna was only hit in the leg, but then Art noticed her and slowly approached. Just as he was about to burn her alive, Sienna suddenly woke from the dream. Strangely, the angel wings prop in her room had mysteriously caught fire from a candle. Sienna rushed out of the room, shouting for her family's help. Her mother, Barbara, quickly grabbed a fire extinguisher and put out the blaze. The next morning, Sienna told her two best friends about this strange dream, but they couldn't believe the fire in her house was connected to the dream, insisting it was just a coincidence. Sienna firmly believed otherwise, yet she had no way to prove it. Coincidentally, when Sienna went with Allie to buy a new set of wings, Allie got a call from her mother. As she walked to the store entrance, she unexpectedly bumped into Art. Fortunately, Art's target at that moment was not Allie, but she left a lasting impression on him. Meanwhile, Sienna was still waiting inside the store. When she turned to look toward the door, she suddenly saw Art leaning against the frame, staring straight at her. A chill ran down Sienna's spine. She carefully edged her way past him, then slipped toward the service counter. But just as she was paying, she realized her bag had been left downstairs. Suddenly, Art's actions made her jump in fright. She searched through her purse for her wallet, glancing nervously at Art, her fear reaching its peak. After paying, she wanted to leave quickly, but Ricky insisted on packing her things into a bag. Sienna reluctantly agreed. Seeing no one around, Art slowly walked toward her. Sienna stood frozen, trembling. When Art pulled out a small horn to tease her,
"Stop! Please stop! Please!"
Ricky returned just in time, breaking the tension. Sienna grabbed her wings and rushed out of the store, but Ricky never imagined that this act of kindness would seal his fate. Art stepped to the counter, grabbed a wine bottle, and smashed it over Ricky's head. He dragged him out from behind the counter. Then he stabbed the broken bottle straight into Ricky's eye. Ricky collapsed to the ground in agony, powerless to fight back. Art then picked up a cleaver and brought it down on Ricky's head. With strike after strike, Ricky's life was brutally ended. After finishing, Art went to a laundromat. He tossed his blood-stained clothes into the washing machine. He was reading the newspaper with satisfaction when he heard strange noises from the next room. Art turned to see where it came from, and there stood a little girl dressed as a clown, waving at him. But Art was not angered by the little pale girl's reckless behavior. Instead, he played along with her clapping game. All of this was witnessed by the shop owner nearby. When Art was about to leave, he surprisingly cleaned the floor spotless before casually slinging his bag over his shoulder and swaggering out of the laundromat. But the matter was far from over. Just as Sienna's younger brother Jonathan was about to go home after school, he suddenly witnessed a terrifying scene in the hallway. Art and the little pale girl were sitting on the floor, not only playing with a possum that had been dead for days, but even throwing the animal's body into his arms. Frightened, Jonathan dropped the possum and ran away in panic. When he got home, Jonathan told Sienna about what he had seen at school. A little girl who had been dead for 10 years had suddenly appeared before his eyes, and she was living together with last year's killer, Art. Sienna could not believe what he said, thinking her brother was only making excuses to skip school and talking nonsense. But she did not realize that her moment of carelessness would bring disaster to those around her. On Halloween morning, Allie handed out candy to children who came to her door. After politely seeing off a mother and child, she suddenly noticed a car parked on the road outside her house. She only glanced at it and didn't think much of it. But before she could climb the stairs, the doorbell rang again. When she opened the door and saw it was an adult, she politely refused. Although Art repeatedly insisted on asking for candy, Allie stood firm and closed the door. But Art did not leave. He pounded hard on Allie's door, determined not to give up. If Allie had kept calm at this moment, she could have avoided unnecessary trouble, but she chose the most extreme way to handle it. When she caught sight of the blood-stained tools inside his bag, fear suddenly rose in her heart. She realized that the stains on Art's clothes might not be props, so she quickly shut the door and locked it tightly. She was left trembling with fear. Humiliated, Art went back to his place and began forging a special weapon. He hammered blades into the legs of a bed frame, then heated iron nails to sharpen them. A spiked club was soon completed. Watching last year's interview replaying on the television, he angrily walked over and kicked the screen to pieces. Meanwhile, Sienna was at home watching the news, hearing that the host attacked earlier was still in critical condition, while the culprit remained at large. It turned out that after attacking the medical examiner, Art had returned to the house. The examiner tried to call the police for help, but with his throat injured, he could make no sound. Art calmly walked over, picked up the phone, and hung it up. Then he lifted a hammer and struck the examiner's head. Another heavy blow shattered his teeth. Next, he violently tore away his eye. This action symbolized the punishment for trying to uncover Art's true face. Afterwards, Art ripped apart the examiner, took some medical supplies from the room, and left the scene. Night soon fell. Allie, after finishing her makeup, was preparing to head to the Halloween party. Suddenly, she heard the sound of glass breaking downstairs. She walked down curiously and found that the balcony glass by the dining room had been completely smashed. Even more terrifying, Art, whom she had humiliated during the day, was now moving freely around her house without any regard for her. After drinking some water, Art picked up a knife and fork and looked at Allie with a mocking expression. Terrified, Allie turned and ran toward her room, but Art blocked her path. She hurried upstairs into her room, and at this point, there was no way out. Just as she was about to jump out of the window, Art grabbed her and threw her onto the bed. Immediately after, his actions symbolized the punishment for Allie looking down on others, but Art did not stop. He took scissors and cut off all of Allie's hair. Then he used various cruel methods to torment her. His mercilessness was unbearable to watch. At this moment, Allie's mother returned home, and when she saw the shattered balcony glass, she sensed something was wrong. She rushed upstairs toward her daughter's room, but when she opened the door, she saw a scene she could never have imagined in her life. Allie, tormented and barely breathing, weakly cried out for her mother to save her, and this horrifying scene drove her into complete collapse. And she, too, paid the price with her life. But Sienna knew nothing about what was happening in Allie's house. She was carefully dressing up to attend the party that evening. She painted her body with makeup, clipped chains into her hair, and put on the armor costume she had prepared for so long. Looking in the mirror at her dazzling self, Sienna felt very satisfied. But she did not know that a deadly disaster was already closing in on her. Sienna, dressed in her costume, arrived at the party and quickly blended into the cheerful atmosphere. Just as she forgot all her troubles and danced freely, she suddenly saw the little pale girl in the middle of the dance floor. But in the blink of an eye, she disappeared again. When she wanted to explain her strange encounter to Brooke, suddenly, the appearance of the little pale girl made Sienna collapse on the spot. Everyone stared at the hysterical Sienna in the middle of the dance floor, because no one else could see the little pale girl. Meanwhile, at home, her mother was quarreling with her brother for skipping school. She not only tore apart Jonathan's sketchbook that he had treasured for years, but also slapped him hard across the face. In anger, Jonathan ran away from home, but before he got far, he was drawn to a car parked by the side of the road. At the very moment he turned his head, the once empty car suddenly revealed the little pale girl sitting inside. Terrified, he turned and ran into the distance. Alone at home, Barbara suddenly heard a loud noise coming from the garage. She followed the sound and entered the garage. To her anger, the entire car was covered with tissues and pumpkin shells. She thought it must have been her mischievous son's doing. Just as she wiped the glass with a sponge, suddenly Art appeared inside, pointing a gun at her head. At this moment, Jonathan also ran back home. As he was about to go upstairs, he suddenly saw his mother sitting motionless at the table, her face so mangled it was beyond recognition. What shocked him even more was that Art was in his house, carrying a plate of rice to Barbara's table, then pulling out a giant syringe and grinning at him. Frightened, Jonathan dashed upstairs, but Art knocked him down to the ground, then injected him with a sedative, leaving him powerless. Because Sienna's behavior ruined the party atmosphere, Brooke had no choice but to take her away. At the same time, Brooke was furious at Sienna's outrageous behavior, thinking she might be suffering from an illness like epilepsy. Angry, Sienna shouted for her to send her home immediately. But just then, she received a call from her brother, asking her to pick him up near the amusement park. But she had no idea that the voice on the phone was actually little pale girl imitating her brother. When she arrived, Sienna opened the car door and hurried into the amusement park. She shouted her brother's name loudly, but there was no response. So she had to keep walking along the road ahead. But even at the end, she still didn't see any trace of him. Sienna then placed her hopes inside the pavilion. The interior was decorated with eerie horror, with frightening props appearing from time to time. But for the sake of her brother, she forced herself to go on. At this moment, Brooke and her boyfriend were waiting in the car for Sienna. And when they saw that she had not returned for a long time, Brooke rejected her boyfriend and was about to call to ask about her situation. But Jeff, who was upset at being ignored, angrily stepped out of the car. Just as he was relieving himself halfway, Art suddenly appeared and stabbed him several times in his vital spots. Immediately after, Art walked to the car window, smashed the glass with a punch, and dragged Brooke straight out from the driver's seat. When Art raised his knife to strike, Brooke kicked him down and managed to escape. Art watched his prey run toward the trap and gave a cold smile. Carrying his bag, he strolled forward unhurriedly. Dragging her injured leg, Brooke ran all the way into the pavilion. Perhaps it was fate, because she ended up inside a locked chamber with no exit, and at this moment, Art had already caught up. Brooke picked up a wooden stick nearby, trying to scare him off. But when Art slowly raised his customized spiked club, despair instantly consumed her. However, this was only a trick. Art's true weapon was the strong acid in his hand. As Brooke cried for mercy, he suddenly hurled the acid. At once, smoke rose from Brooke's face. Then, under the repeated strikes of Art's spiked club, Brooke completely lost her life. At this moment, Sienna heard the cries for help and rushed over. What she saw in front of her made her collapse. She never thought that because of her, Brooke would be dragged into such tragedy. And at this moment, Art was standing at the door, staring at her coldly. By the time she noticed, it was too late. Even worse, Jonathan had somehow appeared in the room as well. Sienna shouted for her brother to run while grabbing a wooden plank from the ground to strike Art first. Art grabbed her hair and slammed her into the wall, the repeated blows leaving Sienna writhing in pain on the floor. Looking at the weakened Sienna on the ground, Art stepped on her head, knocking her out. Jonathan was now hiding behind a curtain. Watching Art draw closer, he dared not make a sound. But he didn't realize this was a trap carefully set by Art, and thinking he hadn't been discovered, he bolted outside. Unexpectedly, as soon as he reached the corner, Art seized him by the neck. The small Jonathan was no match for Art, and within moments he was struck down to the ground. Just as Art was celebrating with a triumphant gesture, Sienna suddenly woke up and ambushed him from behind. Art immediately fought back. Ignoring the pain of her wounds, Sienna thrust the spiked club into Art's head. Before Art could react, she grabbed her brother and pulled him quickly toward another place. In no time, they reached another chamber. Sienna wanted Jonathan to stay put while she searched for an exit. But Art was already hiding behind Jonathan, and with one move, he subdued him. Then he picked up his bladed whip and lashed Jonathan's back. Fortunately, Sienna arrived in time to save him, but she was no match for Art, and within moments she was beaten into helplessness. Art then turned his target back to Jonathan, striking him again and again with the whip. Summoning all her strength, Sienna crawled over her brother and shielded him with her own body, enduring Art's relentless strikes. Just then, the situation changed. Sienna seized the opportunity and grabbed the whip in Art's hand, enduring the sharp pain as she tore it away from him. Then she lashed Art furiously, unleashing her deep rage. Next, she snapped off an iron bar nearby and drove it hard into Art's head. Looking at Art lying on the ground, Sienna finally felt a moment of relief. But as she called for her brother to go home, Art suddenly attacked her from behind, slamming her to the ground and choking her so tightly she could not move. Fallen to the floor, Jonathan glanced at the gun strapped to his sister's leg and had an idea. He quickly pulled it out but was shoved aside by Art. Just as Sienna was on the brink of losing her breath, Jonathan aimed the gun at Art and pulled the trigger, blasting him to the ground. Yet Art was still not dead. When Sienna regained consciousness, she saw her brother on the verge of death under Art's assault, and she rushed to save him. During their struggle, she was pierced in the stomach by Art's sword and pushed down into the basement. But Sienna did not die. She was trapped inside a water tank, reliving the nightmare she had seen before. Only this time, all her friends were covered in blood. She cried desperately for help, but no one could see her, and after struggling for a while, she went completely still. At that moment, the sword on the ground suddenly shone with a dazzling light and brought Sienna back to life. She climbed out of the pit and saw Art biting into Jonathan's leg, and in a burst of rage, she swung the sword and cut off Art's head. At this moment, the little pale girl appeared again, but she did not attack them. Instead, she carried Art's head away. In the final scene, Victoria in the psychiatric hospital used her own blood to write Vicky plus Art on the wall, foreshadowing that Art the Clown was not truly gone. That's all for today. If you enjoy this type of movie, you can check out the original film. See you next time.